I'm going to read you one of my favourite Christmas stories. The title of the story is Papa Panov's Special Day. And this is Papa Panov. He's a shoemaker. That's his job, fixing shoes and making new shoes. Here he is again. He's got a lovely smile. Can you see his gold spectacles? They're helping him to see what he's doing. Papa Panov's Special Day. A long time ago, almost too long ago to remember, there lived an old shoemaker. His home was far away, almost too far to imagine, in a small Russian village. His name was Panov, but nobody called him Panov, or Mr. Panov, or even Shoemaker Panov. Wherever he went in the village, he was known as Papa Panov, because everybody was so fond of him. Papa Panov was not very rich. All he owned in the world was one small room looking out onto the village street. And in that one room he lived and slept and made shoes. But neither was he very poor. He had all his shoemaking tools, a beautiful cast iron stove to cook his food and warm his hands, a great wicker chair where he sat and snoozed, a good firm bed with a patchwork cover, and a little oil lamp to see by when evening crept in. And there were so many people who wanted new shoes made or old ones patched and soled and healed that Papa Panov always had enough money to buy bread from the bakers, coffee from the grocers, and cabbage to make his soup for dinner. Cabbage to make soup for his dinner. So Papa Panov was quite happy most of the time. Most of the time his eyes would sparkle through his little round spectacles, and he would sing and whistle and shout a cheery greeting to people passing by. I think this is the street that Papa Panov lives on. Oh, look, there's a boot sign. That must be the room where Papa Panov lives. Ah, there he is. But on this particular day, it was different. Papa Panov stood sadly in the window of his little shop and thought of his wife, who had died many years before, and of his sons and daughters who had all grown up and gone away. It was Christmas Eve and everybody else was at home with their families. Papa Panov looked up and down the village street and saw windows bright with candles and lamps and Christmas trees. He heard laughter and squeals of children playing games, and the faint smell of roasting meat crept through the cracks round the door and window of his little shop. "Dearie, dearie," said Papa Panov, pulling at his long grey moustache and shaking his head slowly from side to side. "Dearie, dearie." And there was nobody to bring back the sparkle behind his little round spectacles. Papa Panov sighed a great sigh. Then he slowly lit the oil lamp, went to a high shelf, and lifted down an old brown book. He dusted some scraps of leather off the bench, set a pot of coffee on the stove, sat down in the great wicker chair, and began to read. Now, Papa Panov had never been to school and could not read very well, so as he went, he ran his finger along the lines, saying the words out loud. This was the story of Christmas. He read how a little boy, Jesus, was born, not in a good warm house, but in a cowshed, because there wasn't any room at the inn where his mother and father had asked to stay the night. "Dearie, dearie," said Papa Panov, pulling at his long moustache. "If they had come here, they could have slept on my good bed, and I would have covered the little boy with my patchwork quilt. I should like some company and a little child to play with." Papa Panov got up and poked the stove. It was becoming quite foggy outside, so he turned up the lamp. He poured himself a mug of coffee and went back to his book. He read how the rich men travelled across the desert to bring wonderful presents for the little boy Jesus. Presents of gold and sweet-smelling spices. "Dearie, dearie," sighed Papa Panov, "if Jesus came here, I shouldn't have anything to give him." Then he smiled, and his eyes sparkled behind his little round spectacles. He got up from the table and went over to a high shelf. On it was a dusty box tied with string. He opened the box and unwrapped a pair of tiny shoes. Papa Panov held one small shoe in each hand and stood very still. They were the best shoes he had ever made. He put them lovingly away in their box and lowered his old limbs back into the great wicker chair. "That's what I would have given him," he murmured. He sighed a deep sigh and turned his attention to the book once more. Now, whether it was the warmth of the room or whether it was because it was getting late, who can say? But it wasn't long before Papa Panov's bony finger slid from the page. His little round spectacles slipped from his nose, and he fell sound asleep. Outside, the fog grew thicker. Dim figures glided past the window, but the old shoemaker slumbered on, snoring gently. Suddenly, "Papa Panov," said a voice in the room. The old man jumped. His grey moustache quivered. "Who is it?" he cried, looking about him vaguely. He could see so little without his spectacles, but there seemed to be no one there. "Papa Panov," said the voice again. "You wished that you had seen me, that I had come to your little shop, and that you could bring me a gift. Look out into the street from dawn to dusk tomorrow, and I will come. Be sure you recognize me, for I shall not say who I am." Then all was quiet. Papa Panov rubbed his eyes and sat up with a start. The charcoal in the stove had burned low, and the lamp had gone out altogether. But outside, bells were ringing everywhere. Christmas had come. "It was him," said the old man to himself. "That was Jesus." He pulled at his moustache thoughtfully. Perhaps it was a dream. No matter, I will watch and hope that he will visit me on Christmas Day. But how shall I know him? He was not always a little boy. He grew to be a man, a king. They said he was God himself. The old man shook his head. "Dearie, dearie," he said slowly, "I shall have to look very carefully." Papa Panov did not go to bed that night. He sat in his wicker chair, facing the window, and kept watch for the very first person to pass that way. Little by little, the sun's rays crept up over the hill and began to brighten the long cobbled street outside. Nobody was coming yet. "I'll just make a nice pot of coffee for my Christmas breakfast," said Papa Panov to himself cheerfully. "I'll stoke up the charcoal in the stove and brew a huge jug of steaming coffee. But I'll keep an eye on the window all the while. I hope he will come today." So Papa Panov waited.